Okay, this is part 2. I didn't have anything to wipe off the board with. Okay, we're new at this. All right, so I'm just going to erase this. This isn't really important to us. I mean, it's useful. We need all of these things. Well, we need the frequency in order to figure out the cumulative frequency. So that's going to be important for you to figure out anyway. However, didn't really need the relative frequency. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do a frequency diagram. Now, the first thing we have, and we've discussed all the way through this particular section, although you may not have paid much attention to it, is the idea of types of variables. This is cups of coffee. Okay? My assumption is that when you're recording the cups of coffee that people use, it doesn't matter how much of the coffee they use or whatever it may be. In other words, you can only have 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 cups of coffee. Okay, that's a type of data that's discrete. Okay, which means only specific values are allowed within that range. So now you're sitting in a situation where you've got cups of coffee. You can't have 1.5 cups of coffee. You can't have 2.4 or 3.1 cups of coffee. You can have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's discrete. It's numerical, but it's also only specific values. Now, how we graph that has to do with the type of, I guess, bar graph / histogram. Continuous variables, where all values are allowed, we use a bar graph where all the bars are stuck together because it's actually what's called a frequency distribution related to actually areas under the curve. But when we take something that's a discrete variable, we actually have to separate the bars. And of course, we call it a bar graph. Okay, when they're scooched together, it's called a histogram. Okay, we label it a little bit differently, but we still have the same components. So first things first, obviously your axes, okay? And your axes, of course, your horizontal axis is always your variable, your value, your random variable x. And because this is single variable data, this is always going to be a frequency or relative frequency or cumulative frequency. In this case, it's a cumulative frequency. Okay? And this is actually a number of people or customers or whatever who have these cups of coffee. Now, when you do this, of course, you have to make sure you go up to 20 when you draw your scale. So I know I've kind of scrunched this in here. It's kind of a small graph. Whenever we do any assessments, you'll have a nice piece of graph paper to use. This is very low tech. Okay? And we know this is going to be 20 and 10 and 5 and 15. I guess I'm a little close there, but anyway, we're doing our best here. And from here, you maybe want to put a break in the axis. In this case, you don't need to put a break in the axis. Okay? And you would label. Now, in this case, you can label it with the entire grouping if it's grouped data. That's discrete. But in this case, it's an actual value. So we're just going to go 0, and then 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. And of course, we're going to represent them with bars. You can even represent it with individual sticks if you want to, but most people really like bars when they use these things. Okay? And then you just plot the data. Make sure the bar is the height that's representative of the cumulative frequency. If you remember, I erased it, but my x sub I is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the values that went along with these frequencies. So obviously, when you have a nice sheet of grid paper, you'll be able to do this exactly. I'm doing my best, okay, here. But it looks like it's about 2. We're going to go for 10 for the next one, so my bar is going to go up to 10. For 2, I'm going to go up to 16. For 3, 19, pretty boring. I mean, you don't really need to see how I graph this. This isn't rocket science. But it does require you to know the key components of a successful graph. Now, if we were going to really do this perfectly, what we would want to do is we would want to make sure a few things are included here. First of all, we also have to have a label. In this case, this is number of refills, or number of cups of coffee. Okay? And then in this case, there's a couple of criteria you need to do. First of all, your bars need to be the same size. That's key. I haven't done it perfectly here, but remember, I don't have grid paper. Okay, so this is just a quick rough sketch. You saw the sketch in the notes that I made. It was ugly. Okay? And of course, these spacings need to be nice and perfect. Again, I'm going from scratch. You got to give me a bit of a break here. Okay? And last but not least, you need to have labels on each of your axes. You need to have graduations written correctly. And then, of course, here you need to have labels on these particular groupings. Okay? Because it's discrete, we also need spaces between the bars. When there's spaces between the numbers, there's spaces between the bars. It's simple. Okay, the last thing we need is we need a title. In that title, you're going to have the word distribution. Oh, let me make that neater. Okay, distribution. So this is going to be a cumulative frequency distribution. Okay, got to have that word distribution. And then from here you would want to say showing, and you're going to want to describe what the variable is. Okay, in this case, it's going to be a long, probably multi-sentence sort of title showing the number of cups of coffee, or the distribution of the number of cups of coffee each individual customer drinks in one particular night in this restaurant or in this diner or whatever it is. Okay, but you want to be descriptive after that. But I'm going to be looking for cumulative frequency, I'm going to be looking for distribution, and then I'm going to be looking for the description of the variable at least. Okay, all these components are key to making a successful graph. Full marks, nice accurate representation, so there's no bias introduced by that. Okay, hopefully that's good. You had fun? We'll go from there.